Hello YouTubes, this is Grimweird coming back at you with yet another edition of Enigmatica 2 Expert Mod Pack Playthrough Action with Minecraft 1.12.2 and Enigmatica 2 version 1.75. So when last we left, we had set up some armor recycling, we had set up a Nuclearcraft reactor, and we were waiting for things to get done with that. So let's go take a look at how that's gone on over the last 24 hours or so. Here is our finished Nuclearcraft reactor in all its glory, with the cabling replaced with Flux Network, which I'll talk a bit more in a bit. But first, let's take a look at where we're at. So it is settled in. If we take a look at it here, we're at 100%. 5821 temperature against an optimal temperature of 5825 for deuterium. And so things are going good there. If we hover over the green bar for cooling, we'll see that our temperature change is minus 15 Kelvin per tick. And that 5821 number is in mega Kelvin. So obviously that's a very small change. So we will drift slightly out over the next couple weeks, but I can always just turn off cooling for a few minutes and get us up a few degrees if our efficiency starts to hurt. Our final thing for this is that we've got a toroid size 12, and the final stats are 4.8 something million RF per tick for a toroid size 12 with deuterium fuel. So things are going well. Yeah, and there's sort of three aspects to power, though. There is producing it, and there's storing it, and then there's moving it. So we can produce, and we could now produce and store it, but moving it around was a bit of a problem because we were being didn't have any cables that could get millions of RF out of this beast. And so that's why I pushed real hard last night for getting into Flux Networks. But we'll circle back around to that. Let's finish up talking about what I did chronologically. We noticed that we were burning through deuterium faster than we were producing it. So the deuterium was going down here, as was our heavy water stores. So I had originally built 30 or so of these, and made myself room for another 10. I did have sort of a back of the napkin calculation based on how fast things were burning here. And I figured, you know what? I've got this auto-craftable and I have tons of materials. Let's just go ahead and double the pumps. So I went up to, I think this is now 60. Yeah, I think it's 60. Anyway, it's a lot. And now we are making plenty. So we can see here that on our gargantuan drum of heavy water, we are climbing nicely. There is, what is that? 40,000 buckets, 755, now 40,756. Now 40,758. So we are ahead of this at roughly a bucket every few seconds. So this will eventually top out and fill up this drum, which is fine. I could probably back off about maybe even 10 of these pumps and still be fine. But I'd rather make more and not have it or more and not need it than to make less and not have it. So we're just going to let that go. It's not like we are lacking power now to run a few pumps. I also made a third electrolyzer just to keep things moving through here and just so that I could split up the speed upgrades. I took them all up to 8 energy and 8 speed, again, because I'd rather make too much deuterium out of heavy water than not enough. So the electrolyzers are cooking along, and we can watch now. We've got 65, 535-ish, going up to 6-ish. So basically our drum is topped out, and so it drops off and then makes some and drops off and makes some, I think. But we're making plenty there. So everything is good there. So let's talk about the cooling. So I had a bunch of active coolers made up, these bad boys, active fluid coolers, and I made a few of the infinite water sources from Nuclearcraft to keep them fed. These infinite water sources are not as good a water sources as, say, a sink, but putting sinks up there would have looked silly, so I didn't want to do it. So at least the infinite water sources look reasonable and fit in with the theme reasonably well. So basically what we've got going on here is, if I recall correctly, let me take a look at my notes. Each unbalanced watered active cooler was giving us 8.3 of cooling against a goal, if we look over here. Come on, get closer. Against a goal of 5,000 Kelvin per tick. Each unbalanced water-driven active cooler was giving us 8.3. When they were balanced, which means there was one on the opposite side, each one was giving us, let's see, what was it? I think it's 4 times that. I've already lost where I put this down. I jotted it on a piece of paper next to my computer, but I think I scribbled over it. But the bottom line is, if you penciled it all out, we're going to need something like, oh, here it is. The unbalanced ones were 8.3. If they were balanced, then each one of the pair was 33.2. And then if I had an unbalanced one cooled with resonant ender, so if we take a look over here, you can see I've got a ender tank full of molten resonant ender, and each unbalanced one of these is 900 worth of cooling. So how that breaks down then is I've got these 5 at 900 each, and there are not balancing ones on the counter side because I'd run into too much. So these 5 alone give me 4,500 cooling towards that goal of 5,000 cooling, where we're balancing our heat with 100% cooling. And so then I had to come up with 500 in a hodgepodge of ways from lesser cooling like water. So I've got, let's see, this is 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are 7 balanced ones. So you can see here they're balanced on the other side, so across the way and on the down as opposed to on the up. And so that makes up a good chunk of the rest. And then to get the last little bit of cooling I need, and just to round us up to 5,000-ish, I've got 4 that are unbalanced water active coolers. And so this whole thing, we got, 4,500 from the resonant ender. We get another, big chunk from the 14 that are balanced. And then we just fill up the rest here. And you just sort of got to play with these numbers until you get to around 5,000. And then I think the minus 15 just comes from rounding off. So that minus 15 Kelvin per tick is just from rounding off fractions, but that's okay. We're not going down, obviously, in temperature very much at all, and it could take a week before we actually break, start losing a noticeable amount of power. And all I got to do is turn off the valve on my ender tank for a little bit to take our active cooling down to 500. And then let it run for 10 minutes or so, and it'll go right back up a few degrees. So yeah, everything is going good here, and we are making 4.838 million RF per tick with this bad boy. That ought to do us for the short term until we get into something draconic evolution-y. So this is all going well. As we're saying here, I am cooling with resonant ender. There are definitely other ways to cool. A lot of people run a instead of a deuterium-deuterium reactor, they run a deuterium-tritium reactor using tritium byproduct that I think comes out of probably their evaporation plant from Mechanism, where they're doing some ore quintupling or what have you. And I approach things a little differently. Instead of trying to quintuple ore, I just build really big void miners and just get tons and tons and tons of raw ore and only double it. And also, instead of then trying to do tritium deuterium, which is a bit better of a fuel source, I just make a really big deuterium. But so yeah, when you're doing a deuterium, let's take a look at that. When you're doing a deuterium tritium, if we take a look at fuels, which one is that? Yeah, here's deuterium tritium. You get helium out, and there is a helium supercooler, so you can actually use this helium product that comes out, and you get a decent amount of it out. You can use that and feed it into a, what is that thing? Liquid helium coolers, and so you can actually use the product to cool itself. But since I'm not doing that, it gives me the reason, the excuse, if you will, to make a little monster farm here for enders. And so basically we have extra ender pearls. We're getting some ender pearls. Let me back up so we don't have to listen to their death screams. But we have some ender pearls, a decent amount of ender pearls even, coming from our normal monster farm from Cursed Earth. But to supplement that, and we're up to 52,000 ender pearls, so I may need to turn this off soon. But to supplement that, I've got an enderman farm here going, and we're collecting ender pearls, and those are being turned into resonant ender, and I'll show you where that is in a moment. Also, real quickly, I'll talk a bit about this, but obviously I'm into Ender IO now, and I have powered spawners. So I've got a powered spawner for basals and a powered spawner for Blizz too, and we'll talk in a minute about why that is. But yeah, so we have another farm down here for that kind of stuff. So let's teleport upstairs and take a look at what's going on with our Ender. If I can remember where I'm doing that. Is it here? No, where am I doing it? I think I'm doing. Oh, here's where I'm doing it. Couldn't remember if I was doing it through a melter or through a another device. So here's what I've got going on there. I've basically just got a melter full of ender pearls, and I've got an export bus hooked up to a mini chest behind here. Let's see if I can find my tool, show you what that is all about. Yeah, so if we grab our Yeta wrench and look through here, well, you can't really see it, but basically I've just got an export bus going into a mini chest to keep this thing running and full of ender pearls. And then it pumps out into the ender tank, which is hooked up to my active cooling downstairs. So that's my cooling system, and it gives me an excuse also to pull up a lot of dimlets in case I get a chance to work on RF Tools Dimensions. I've up to 537 dimlets from my Ender farm. Alright, so that pretty much covers the Nuclearcraft fusion reactor. Let's talk a bit about progression through technology. So we made this bad boy and assembled it last time. This is the Advanced Metallurgic Fabricator, and it allows us to make titanium. So if we take a look here and here, we can now do this recipe, which is magnesium ore and salt and carbon plates turns into titanium ingots. And we needed titanium to do some other stuff. Oh, and this also requires liquid chlorine. I pulled my liquid chlorine down, but basically back behind here I temporarily set up a melter, and I melted salt out of Pam's Harvest Craft's cooking for blockheads. So I melted the salt and then mixed it with, I forget what. I've already forgotten. I did this about 24 hours ago, but all right, so let's see if we back this up. So we took salt out of Pam's Harvest Craft, and then we used an electrolytic separator to go into sodium and chlorine. And then we sent that to a rotary condensator, and we turned the gaseous chlorine into liquid chlorine, and here it is. And I just ran through a bunch. I made enough for 2 stacks. I think this is my 3rd barrel, so the first 2 barrels was enough to give me a couple stacks of titanium, some of which I've used up. But yeah, I've got 102 titanium, and I've used then 26 titanium. And then I've got a backup barrel in case I need to make more. But bottom line is I now have plenty of titanium. The next time I need to make more titanium, I will probably already have rutile ore from another planet. So that's why I tore down the liquid chlorine stuff in case I need to repurpose those machines. So why were we after titanium? So titanium is one of those roadblocks that you run into, like steel. So once you have titanium, you can then make the titanium aluminide plates, which are required for the simple machine chassis, which gets you into Ender IO. And once you can make the Ender IO machines, you can then make things like the Ender resonator on a slice and splice, and you can make all the things that are required to make the dimensional transceiver. The dimensional transceiver can then be used in a sag mill, which is another Ender IO machine. So you need the slice and splice and the dimensional, and the sag mill. And the dimensional transceiver can be ground up into flux cores. So this is how you get your first initial flux cores in the game for Flux Networks. And then once you have Flux Networks, you can use Flux Networks to create more Flux Networks. In other words, you can then go to this recipe using one of the ones that you ground up from a dimensional transceiver to make more of them. Using Flux, which is made through black quartz and redstone and obsidian. And so what you can do with these then is make yourself a flux network for power transmission, which is what we've got here. So if we run upstairs, I've got a basic flux storage. So this is just a, it's like, what is that? 2.1 billion, it looks like, in, well, it's got a buffer of 10 million. So that's probably unnecessary to do, but if we look at my networks, I've got 2 networks. I've got a spindit network. So my spindit network has power coming out of storage and then being spent in the world. My bankit network has power coming out of generation, like my advanced generators or my Nuclearcraft fusion reactor, and going into storage. So those are just the ways I set up my 2 networks. There's obviously lots of ways to do it, but there's a few nice things about it. One, it will transfer lots of RF. So you're no longer bound by cables that are like, a few 100,000 each cable, which really sort of limits you when you get up into the millions of RF. And the other thing is you can set limits, which are important if you are trying not to crash your Nuclearcraft fusion reactor. So let's take a look at the Bankit network. So the Bankit network is mostly funded by this flux plug. So plugs put power into your network. And so you can see I've put a transfer limit of 4.5 million on it. And that is so I never pull this thing completely dry. If I completely dry this thing out, it doesn't have the power to keep itself heated and it starts to crash. So I could bump this up to probably 4.8 million if I needed to, but I just have it at a nice round 4.5 million RF per tick that I'm limiting this plug from only drawing that much out. The first time I did one of these in my last playthrough, I slapped it on there. I sucked 10 million straight out, and it turned my machine's heaters off, and things got ugly. So that's why I do that. And so this is giving me power into the Bankit. And if we take a look at where else power is coming into the Bankit, oops, this is for later. I also have this plug on here, which is banking 80,000 RF per tick coming out of my my Enderium turbine advanced generator. So these plugs are putting power into Bankit, and then I'm spending power out of Bankit by putting it into my induction port of my induction matrix. And so my induction matrix is storing 200 billion, 204 billion RF. And it's topped off, and that's why this input is jumping around as things are being used. So roughly, with everything I have currently turned on, I'm jumping around about 1 million RF per tick coming and going. So then my Spindit network is where I actually use power out of my batteries. So once again, we have a plug pulling power into the Spindit network. And so it is pulling power in, and then I have that power going out to one of my power cells to power all of the channel 9 power cells. This is powering the channel 8 one. Anyway, I have power going into a network of power cells to keep them going. I'm trying to remember where I'm still using any power cells. I rounded most of them up and replaced most of them with plugs. So here I have a Spindit plug, or a Spindit point to power my ME system. I've now got Spindit points, flux points here to power the arc furnace and the reactor. Got one here on the advanced metallurgic fabricator. Got one down there to power that stuff. But I do still have a few of these around. These are ID9, and on somewhere I've got a flux point that's powering these power cells, just to keep them running. Here it is. So we've still got some power cells out there that I just haven't replaced yet because don't really need to. But many of the power cells I've replaced. Now that we've got tons of power, I'm sort of letting the metal fabricator run a bit more. So you can see it's getting to 100% pretty darn fast. We're getting to a decent amount of UU matter. So we're up to, 89 buckets plus 16 buckets, so a decent amount of buckets. However, I think making 10,000 pistons is going to require about 150 buckets. So we do want to keep this thing running. I might want to look into getting it a lot more scrap by putting a few more recyclers on it. but I just am not that worried about it. So now we have lots of power generation and lots of power storage and the ability to transfer power. So we are powered, at least until Draconic Evolution. So that is good, good, good. Let's talk a bit more about pushing the boundaries of technology here. So the next thing that we really wanted was, what else did I need? Oh, I also needed, in addition to Ender IO, so titanium led to Ender IO. Ender IO led to the ability to make Flux Networks, but I also needed to do a little bit of work on extended crafting to get a charged draconium block. So the charged draconium block is made through a crafting core, and it also requires some crystalline that comes through the elite crafting table. So there's a bunch of this stuff that we had to do. So we had to make we had to make the white basic crafting table, and then make some yellow crafting tables, and then make some blue crafting tables. And then we were able to make crystalline from this recipe, and then we were also able to make a crafting core out of the crystalline component that we had just made, which then allowed us to do, if we hit uses, it allowed us to do this recipe where you turn 2 draconium blocks into 2 charged draconium blocks. Now if we take a look at this, let's back up. If we take a look at this, it uses, oh gosh darn it, it takes 2 billion FE or RF or whatever you want to call it. It takes 2 billion to do this operation. 2 billion. So you power up your crafting core, and then you slap a draconic core on both, or a draconic block on both the core and a nearby pedestal. So that's where the 2 go. And if you hook that up by just slapping a normal power cell on it or putting a wire to it, it will take forever. Forever. Now it will eventually complete if you are patient, but I am not a patient man, as you can probably see by how quickly I'm moving through technology roadblocks here. So when you set this up, just keep in mind that you either have to give it hours to complete if you're using normal cables, or you got to power it faster and better. And this is a requirement before you can make Flux Networks, because you have to have the charged draconium before you can make the octatic capacitors, which is then required to make the dimensional transceiver, which is required to make your first flux cores. So I've already told you I'm not patient. I set it up here. I sort of watched how fast it was taking energy from my power cell. I tried slapping extra power cells on it. I tried pulling other stuff together. And after about 15 minutes of me going, there's just no way I'm going to wait hours for the damn charged draconium, I racked my brain and I thought, aha, I've got it. So I picked up the pedestal and the core, and I went straight to the source. So basically I removed these from my output here. So I have, this is an input induction port, an induction port that is turned to input, because you can tell because it's green. Under here is another induction port that is tuned to output because it is red. So it looks like this. So I removed these conduits temporarily. I slapped the crafting core straight onto my induction matrix and put the pedestal next to it. And I made my charged draconium right here at the source, because this bad boy will actually, in theory, output power pretty darn fast. I forget which one. I'm pretty sure I have the top of the line induction provider here. So it will deliver at, I think, 13.1 million RF per tick. It may only be the elite one, I forget already, but even that is 1.63 million RF per tick. It must be the 13 because it finished pretty fast. And so anyway, that is how I would recommend you get your first charged draconium, is slap that crafting core straight on the induction port of this. Or if you're using some other form of big storage, then maybe it also has a plug that comes out that will have a huge capacity that doesn't limit you to how much you can fit through a cable or a conduit. Your other options are I think the cryo tubes. I think the only other option for really fast cryo ducts. Gosh darn it. Cryo stabilized flux duct. I think these are almost infinite power, or close to. Here, cryo stabilized flux duct, it says it has infinite RF per tick. I didn't do this because to do this you need a bunch of gelid cryothium, and I didn't have any blizz rods. I now have tons of blizz rods because now I have Ender IO, and now I have put captured a blizz and run it over here for about an hour, and now I have tons of blizz rods. So that brings us to a next important topic. So if we look at blizz, I got 1,000 blizz rods. Basalts, I have 2,900, and blitz 15,000, and blaze 1,400. So get away from that noise. So one of the things that's also required for all of this mess, for moving through the sort of high-tech stuff, is this mana dust, which requires aerothium dust, cryothium dust, pyrothium dust, and petrothium dust. So you will need all four elements of rods, and you will need mana diamonds, so dumping diamonds into mana pools. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that as you're moving through here, this is another roadblock item for us, which is a roadblock to getting this blue crafting table. And we needed the blue crafting table to get the crafting core, to get the charged draconium. So yeah, this is sort of the roadblocky type stuff. The crystalline components that are necessary for this guy, and crystalline and charged draconium and these tables. So those are all sort of roadblocky technology items that I worked on in the last 24 hours. Now that I had some power, and now that I had access to Ender IO thanks to our titanium production. So yeah, now what? We're going to need to make a quantum compressor at some point in the not too distant future. If we take a look at it, it is basically a trash compactor of ultimate scale, and it does things like make singularities out of 10,000 ardite items or 10,000 iron items to make singularities. I've never done draconium and evolution, and I've never done, or draconic evolution, and I've never done avaritia. I was going to do it in my last playthrough, but my first E2E world got really sort of corrupted and it's glitchy. So I'm trying to move through this one with a bit more speed. But I got to start thinking about how I'm going to do all of this stuff, because you need multiples of all of these singularities in the future, which means you need 10,000s of all these items in the future, including, to make this bad boy, let's see, to make the next bad boy, which one is it? One of the things you need to make singularities for applied energistics is 10,000 pistons to make the matter condenser. And the matter condenser is necessary for making singularities in case we want to expand our AE network. So yeah, we got to think about getting all that stuff going. So making a quantum compressor is important. If we look at our other gateways here, I did do some work to open up the other gateways. If we look at getting started, I haven't paid too much attention to the quest book because, quite frankly, I've just been more interested in hitting the key technology roadblocks and knocking them out of the way. And now I can go back and start filling in some of the quest book. But we are up to harvest level complete with supremium, thanks to the supremium dust we've been getting from our Wither boss farm. So the next one is awakened metal, so that's going to be draconic. If we take a look at the gates, I just quickly made some rudimentary snares to open up blood magic. So haven't started working on that yet, but I did open the gate to blood magic just so I could get this open and try and see what I needed to do here. The mystical agriculture gate, when I went to the end, I picked up some ender amethyst, and you can put the ender amethyst into a charging thing. So if we take a look at ender amethyst and what you can do with it, you can put it into an energetic infuser, which is basically just a charger, an item charger, and dump 10 million RF into an ender amethyst to get a infusion crystal. So I did that, and I've got some infusion crystals. So I already had that open. Advanced rocketry, we needed to get, what was stopping us here? Nothing was really stopping us. We made the calcium sulfate so we could make the Nuclearcraft fusion reactor that we're standing under right now. So we were pretty much good to go. I did have to make a metal former because the only way to get iron shafts was through this industrial craft machine. So that did spur me to make a room specifically for industrial craft, because there are a few recipes that can only be made on industrial craft machines. But so I made these, got these rewards, 16 more titanium, so that's good. So we're ready to go into that advanced rocketry. Of course, we've talked about the Ender IO and the importance of getting titanium to get that open, because all of the important machines, the sag mill and the slice and dice and etc. For Ender IO require that simple machine chassis. Oops. So EnvironmentalTech, of course, you've seen me working on that. Draconic Evolution, I just went ahead and made one draconic core. The draconium block, we have that from mining draconium in Twilight Forest. Plutonium, I had some of that as a reward, so that was able to get me there. If we take a look at this, this is the recipe you need to use to get plutonium. We have tiny piles of plutonium from dragon layers. We've now gotten fused metal. We did not have cyanite, so I had to use a plutonium that was a quest reward. I also found 3 or 4 plutonium in dragon layers. But yeah, that's one of the things that I'll talk about. We need to get into plutonium production for this recipe. This is sort of a roadblock recipe for making lots of plutonium for the end game. And as you can see, you need tiny piles of plutonium through IC2 to get that. and you need cyanite from extreme reactors to get it too. So that takes me to actually the next thing, which was I opened up the gate for extreme reactors by making this recipe. Wasn't too hard. There was nothing really in here that was too high tech. It's just setting up the auto crafting recipes and then printing them out. So no big deal there, but I did make it and I got the rewards for it. Some reactor casing and reactor glass. So you can see I have this up here as one of my roadblocks for technology. So we are going to set up a little extreme reactor. We're not going to be doing it for power because I'm standing in the middle of enough power for now. But we do need to make it to turn uranium, which is ore dictionary for yellorium, into plutonium, or into cyanite, pardon me. So that's why we need a little extreme reactor. So we're going to set up just a little guy, probably like a 5x5 or 7x7, just a little guy off in a corner somewhere. I don't even think I'll do anything with the power. We'll just set it up and make it look sort of pretty and have it turn a bunch of uranium into cyanite for us, so that we can use that to make our plutonium. So that sort of talks about where we're going technology-wise. Setting up an extreme reactor for cyanide production and setting up an IC2 nuclear reactor for plutonium production. That's probably what I'm going to do tonight. And I'll do that off camera, but I'll show you what I got going there. Yeah, so now let's talk about quality of life stuff. Now that we've got power, not only was I able to turn on my UU matter production again, but I also now have the power to run bigger EnvironmentalTech machines. So first thing I did was I upgraded my, I think it was a tier 4 Void Ore Miner to a tier 5. Now the importance of the tier 5 is that the tier 5 now gets us into the rare metals. So if we take a look at ore, we're now getting dimensional shards. I've got 733 dimensional shard ores. We are now getting, what else do you get out of this bad boy? Iridium ore. We are now up to 453 iridium ore. So the tier 5 starts to mine iridium for you. This is a bad way to look at this. So instead, let's go to tier 5 uses. All right, so if we look at the last couple pages, this is the important stuff. Prosperity ore, dimensional shard ore, iridium ore. That's basically why we went to the tier 5. And also it'll hold more speed stuff, and it actually uses a little less power than the tier 4, I think. So it's pumping lots of other ore into our system as well. That ore is being auto-processed into ingots, so I'm frightened to see how many iron ingots I have now. 54,000 iron ingots, so we've got lots of that. Now eventually we're going to need multiple iron singularities, so we're going to need hundreds of thousands of iron ore, so I don't feel too bad about it. Or hundreds of thousands of iron ingots, so I don't feel too bad about it. But I got to keep an eye on my ME system. So this is going on. That's good. We're now getting iridium and dimensional ore and etc. But I now had all the goods necessary. With the tier 5, I got ionite. That is the special crystal that comes out of the tier 5 guy. And one of the uses for this is to make modifiers, like the saturation modifier for the Personal Beacon, which means it's so that you're never hungry again. That's lovely. The night vision modifier, so that you are can have night vision, which we now have. flight speed modifier. Creative flight if you haven't got an angel ring yet, although it does require a couple of elytras, but so those kinds of things. So I went ahead and built a tier 5. I just zoomed on straight on up to a tier 5 personal beacon extravaganza. And this thing has got resistance 5, which means I'm now invulnerable to all damage pretty much except for chaos damage. Each resistance level, it makes you 20% resistant to damage and 100% resistant, sort of like unbreakable for Tinker's tools with 5 of them. I no longer have to eat. I can vein mine like crazy and not go hungry. I fly really fast now. So if we take a quick zoom around the room, you can see I'm sort of hauling ass. I can't remember if I've got 4 or 5 of those. It's sort of hard to see, but if you look at my hearts, I now have 4 pink hearts. Purple hearts was as high as I could get playing with food, but I did put a couple of health modifiers in my personal beacon just to see if there was an extra level in this mod pack, and it did go up to pink. So I have even more health now. And I've got night vision, of course, so you can see I see really well down here underground, so that's nice. I've also got 5 strength, which strength actually does affect my laser gun because it counts as a melee weapon. So that is wonderful. So yeah, I'm invulnerable, I can see in the dark, and I can fly really, really fast. And I'm even more deadly with my laser gun. So pretty much nothing to fear in this world again until we face the Chaos Dragon. So that is wondrous. This does take a ton of power, as does this. Forget if it tells me. Let's see if it actually tells me how much. Ooh, I might be able to tell from clicking on here. Okay, so my Void Ore Miner is taking roughly 395,000 RF per tick, so it's an expensive beast. It is maxed for speed with, looks like 6 speed modifiers in it. And this bad boy, if we take a click on it, is another 52,000 RF per tick to become invulnerable and see in the dark and not have to eat anymore. So this is the kind of stuff you can do once you get the big power going. So where do we go from here? Well, I want to actually try, I've never done any of the Draconic Evolution or Avaricious stuff before, but I want to try and actually do it, which means I want to do things like make infinity armor. But here's the rub. We got to set up some serious stuff to get this done. So infinity ingots are sort of the main currency here. We need a whole ton of them to do just the set of infinity armor, and there's other infinity stuff like swords and bows, but you can see we need lots of them. And an infinity ingot is made using things like infinity catalysts and ultimate singularities. Pardon me. An ultimate singularity uses up all of these singularities, and each of these singularities, this one requires 10,000 cobalt, this one requires 10,000 titanium, this one requires 10,000 fluix, etc., etc., etc. So 10,000 glowstone, 10,000 everything, fluxed electrum, 10,000 fluxed electrum. So, and that makes one of these bad boys, and it takes 2 of those to make 1 infinity ingot. So yes, that's correct. 20,000 of each of those of each of those things to make 1 infinity ingot. So this is where I usually say, hey, wouldn't it be fun to start a new world? So I've never gone into this stuff, but I'm going to try and force myself into it this time, even though it seems ludicrous. And that means we need probably not only 1 of these, but multiples of these. quantum compressors that are made through the yellow table. So we can make these now, and they're not too hideously horrible to make. So we're probably going to end up making like one for each type of singularity. If we back up and take a look at this, we're probably going to end up making 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's like, what, 39 different singularity types. So I'm probably going to make 39 of these quantum compressors. And then I'm going to feed just a constant stream of that garbage into them to try and get singularities out to make infinity. So at some point, I'm going to have to map all of that out, make a plan of attack for how we're going to manage that, and then get it started. But while that's all working and cooking, we're going to circle back around to magic. So the other thing I've got going on here is because I'm going back to magic, and because I want to make an IC2 nuclear power plant, I've got two things that I'd like to put into compact machines. So if we look at compact machines, these allow you to make the little cubes that are actually pocket dimensions that have up to a 13 by 13 room in them. So we're going to make a couple of these 13 by 13 by 13 pocket dimensions. One for our Thaumcraft, so that our crucible and our essence burning and whatnot does not contaminate anything nearby. And then another one for holding an IC2 nuclear reactor for plutonium generation. So I went ahead and made the little structure here. So we've got 4 of the miniaturization field projectors, and you got to sort of point them towards each other and space them appropriately to make sure that you get at least a 7 by 7 grid here. So it took a little bit work of figuring out how tall it needed to be and how far apart they needed to be. Ended up I was a little higher, but that's okay. I just made a base for it to show me where I needed to be. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it looks like a pillar of 3, and then putting it on the 4th place would be fine. I went up ahead and put it on the 5th place, and then making them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 16 away from each other, or 15 in the middle of them, seemed to work out. And this gives us a scanning cube that is big enough to hold this guy, the 5 by 5 by 5 structure. So to make the 13 by 13 by 13 pocket dimension miniature room, the maximum compact machine, it needs to be at least 6 by 6 by 6. You can't make even numbered ones, so that means at least 7 by 7 by 7. So to make these, you end up making 98 of the walls through this recipe, blocks of iron with redstone on them, and then drop a redstone on it to make 16 of the walls. So I needed 13 of these recipes, 13 blocks of iron to make enough walls for 2 13 by 13 by 13 pocket dimensions. And so these require 98 each and a block of emerald each. So when you do these, you sort of have to get out of the orange and then throw redstone at it. And I found that vaguely annoying because I sort of suck at aiming. The last playthrough I did because so I just went ahead and put a precision dropper up here. I had a dropper already, but now that allows me to put this down. Oops, let's go ahead and do it this way. Put that on top of it. Fly up here. Put that on there. And it'll drop it straight down onto the structure to get shrunk. Now you can just fly up above it and drop straight down. It's not too bad if you can fly up and drop straight down, but I just sort of did it this way for fun. So again, we'll finish up the last couple of these, and then I'll show you. So we drop the redstone on it to complete it, and there we go. And then this is the last set I need of walls for the second. So I ended up doing 13 of these recipes and then 2 of the room recipes. So only 15 recipes. So I wouldn't necessarily go out of your way to make a precision dropper and do it that way. But, you know, hey, it helps me, and I had one at hand. So now we're going to build our next guy. So this is going to become a 13 by 13 pocket dimension for us. So it's 5 by 5 by 5. With an emerald block in the center. I should break out my unbreaking wand so I can finish this faster. Let's set up the emerald. So that needs to be the exact center. So we'll remove that and get that back. All right, speed this up a bit. And, oops, left one side open. Whoa. Not used to how fast I'm flying. So we'll close that up. Now to check if we've got the right recipe, you can take your personal shrinking device, click it on there, and it'll say down in your text area to the bottom left, recipe for maximum compact machine. So we are good to go. So we come up here, oops, and we, instead of dropping redstone on it like the other recipe, for these we're dropping an ender pearl on it, and there she goes. So this is turning those 98 walls we made from the iron and redstone and the 1 block of emerald plus the ender pearl that we dropped on it, and it's condensing this down to a maximum compact machine. And again, one of these will be for Thaumcraft Crucible, and then another one will be for an industrial craft fission reactor. This is not necessary, but it's just something I want to do. I considered just going ahead and building my Thaumcraft stuff in like the Twilight Forest or somewhere, just making a base away from mine. But I sort of like to keep it close. So poof, we've got that. So now I'm done with that stuff. I don't think I'm going to need to shrink anything else, so I'll probably tear that up later. But we've got 2 compact machines. So we are good to go for setting up Thaumcraft refinery, and then plutonium production. So what else? The next sort of big one here is, if we look at gates, oops, was on it, back, bragging rights gates, which is the green extended crafting table, which is this guy. We can make these crystalline trimmed black iron. We can make that. We can make the crystalline. Draconium crystals, I need to set up some mechanism ore washing. We can take sulfuric acid out of my calcium sulfate setup, which I left set up, and wash draconium ore to get draconium slurry and crystallize draconium out of it. So that is doable. All of the rest of this is doable. We can make all of this. except for primal mana. What the hell's primal mana? IC2 coolant, Osgolglass, and Mirian. And Mirian is cobalt, elementium, nanosteel, and terrasteel. Alright, we can make that. We probably have enough from our recycling, armor recycling. So I think the only thing here that gives us real pause is the advanced circuit. We need to set up our advanced rocketry stuff to build this. So that's another thing we could get into is the advanced rocketry. Again, if we need to make like titanium singularities, we really need to sort of get off planet and set up some mining operation that gets us titanium, because that is the one thing which our void miners will not mine for us, is titanium. So we got to set something up to mine titanium. Let's take a look and see if there's any other options than just mining it through like a digital miner on different worlds. Does not look like it. So the industrial foregoing laser, I don't think pulls up titanium. The environmental tech doesn't pull up titanium. I think our only way to get it is to go to one of these 5 planets and set up a digital miner and just pull it out of the ground straight. So that is going to be a pain in the butt, but it is doable. So that's something I can work on in the background, but for right now, I've pushed really hard to get to this point, because this is the point where it's like I feel, pretty godly. I can fly really fast, I can see in the dark, my gun just kicks all sorts of ass, my armor is good, and I don't even need armor because I have 100% damage resistance. So yeah, things are going good. We have a lag spike, so we come up out in the world. So things are good. I got all the technology doodads I really need right now. So the future is basically just all about pushing into that whole bragging rights stuff and getting to other planets. And even getting to other planets, the only real thing that I'm going to get out of that is just access to a lot more titanium. And even then, it might be easier to just build it through a recipe than it would be to go mine it. We'll just have to take a look at that. But there you have it. I'm going to pause here, take a look at our runtime. And if we have some more runtime, I'll talk a bit about what I'm going to do next after to get back into magic stuff. Be right back. All right, and we are at an hour, so we're going to call it an episode here. But I did notice right as I was pausing that we can see the rain barrier. So here we can have my old stuff, which is the steppe. And here we have the terraformed area, which is savanna. So you can see we did successfully get rid of the rain here by terraforming into savanna. However, if you look up, you cannot see stars. So even though it is not raining in my savanna, it is overcast. So I have a feeling I will not be able to use a telescope anywhere in the world on rainy days. But we can now build a weather obelisk from Ender.io. Requires a lot of power. We got a lot of power and a catalyst fluid. I'm not sure what that is. I've never used one of these. Oh, here we go. Liquid sunshine is sunflowers and glowstone. So I should keep that in mind and think about ways to get a bunch of sunflower. So yeah, cool. So I'll put that on the list, one of these. We're intentionally going to make some of these bad boys. And a weather obelisk. All right, that does it for this episode. Sorry we sort of ran through that really quick. I did mention that we set up an actual IC2 room, so I do have the metal former that I needed to make iron shafts. And I put our macerator and our compressor up here, and I wired us a nice room for doing our IC2 stuff. So going into the ME interfaces here and sucking stuff out of it into an import bus chest here. So this is all ready to go. Ender IO actually doesn't have a lot of machines that I'm probably going to use much, so I'm combining it in with some of my thermal expansion stuff. So I've got the sag mill, alloy smelter, slice and splice, and soul binder, and it now sounds like I have. I'm going to put a vat over here for making liquid sunshine. So we are keeping up with our auto crafting. If we take a look at this, actually I guess we could look at all of this. I've got all of these machines hooked up here and all of these recipes for either processing and or assembling in our molecular assembler. I recently added another bunch of stuff to our molecular assemblers, so that area is growing up nicely. So we're now halfway through the second rank of molecular assemblers and etc. So I've still got plenty of room for more recipes, which is good. So yeah, things are going well, and let's call it an episode. When I come back next time, I will probably have a Thaumcraft pocket dimension set up, and I might have an IC2 fusion reactor room set up, and I might start working on astral sorcery, and etc. Talk to you next time. Bye.